Voilà, voilà. Je suis Alex Fancy. Je suis professeur ici à Montellison depuis très longtemps. And I'm also responsible for Tintamarre. A long time ago, I had the idea that there might be a more interesting and more effective way of teaching. So I had the notion of directing theater as a way of promoting bilingualism, biculturalism, and my first ideas of doing theater grew petit à petit into what we have now. So I'm Alex, bonjour.
You were talking about the fact that you thought that there was a more interesting way of teaching. Could you elaborate on that? Why did you start Tintamarre? What was the need to kind of go off in that direction?
I started Tintamarre in part because I had a secret desire to do theater. I wasn't trained in theater at all. I had no theater education, but I had a secret interest in theater. And when I had been a student in Paris, I had gone to theater as much as I could. La première année où j'étais à Paris, j'ai découvert, si vous voulez, j'ai découvert le théâtre. It was a very, very cold winter, and I was totally alone in Paris as a student. I was 20 years old, and I found that theater was a very interesting place to meet les âmes sœurs, to see creativity in its most dazzling forms, and also it was a way to keep warm. And so that's why I started to go to theater, and I had this secret passion for theater. And I also discovered that I loved le théâtre de l'absurde. And at that point, that we're talking about a long time ago, a theater of the absurd, which is better called experimental theater, le théâtre expérimental, was very much in vogue. And the most interesting plays weren't the plays in the big national theaters, they were the shows that I went to see in small, really small, very modest holes in the wall, really, tiny theaters where people were doing the most interesting things. Work by UNESCO, by Arabal, by Tardieu, by Beckett, and so I developed a great love of theater. And then when I started to teach, and j'ai enseigné le français pour gagner ma vie, when I started teaching, I realized that language was being taught, at least by me and by most people, I believe, in situations that weren't appropriate and that weren't authentic. Only 1/3 of what we say is communicated by words. Les deux autres tiers sont communiqués par le ton, c'est-à-dire par la musicalité, et par le geste, par la gestuelle, par le mouvement, par le déplacement. Alors, quand on pense que, quand on parle une autre langue, l'expression physionomique, l'intonation, l'accent, le ton de voix, le mouvement, le geste sont tous très importants. But put yourself in a classroom where students are sitting in rows and very often following a script which is not at all conducive to speaking language as a three-dimensional means of communication, le mot, le ton, et le geste. The traditional language classroom was very, very limiting. Alors, un jour, j'ai décidé, bon, nous allons monter une pièce de théâtre. Et tout a commencé là. So it was because I had la passion secrète du théâtre, and because I was looking for a more authentic, challenging, engaging, interesting way of teaching language. Of course, the Tintamarre experience, le projet Tintamarre, has taken us far beyond language, but that's how it all began.
As I recall, you started off doing des pièces de répertoire.
Oui, tout à fait.
Il n'y avait pas la création de pièces. Pourriez-vous élaborer un peu plus? Quand est-ce que ça a commencé, l'idée de collaborer pour créer une pièce d'abord bilingue et ensuite, si mon analyse est correcte, influencée par le théâtre de l'absurde ou par le théâtre expérimental? D'où est-ce que c'est sorti?
Voilà, la question est très bonne, mais j'aurais un peu de mal à y répondre. Dans le sens que, à un moment donné, mais je ne sais pas quand ou où, je me suis rendu compte que, par définition, le théâtre est une activité collaborative. Dès qu'on commence à monter une pièce de théâtre, il faut qu'on adapte une approche collaborative. Alors, par définition, si vous voulez, c'est un sport collaboratif, mais je me suis rendu compte à un moment donné en route, on avait monté, j'ai commencé par monter des pièces de Molière. Pourquoi? Parce que je connaissais Molière, parce que ça faisait partie du canon, c'était très respectueux. Because it's important to realize as well that what we were doing was exceptional. And I felt that while we were deviating from the syllabus, we were deviating from a program where literature was dominant, I felt some need to respect the program, to sort of meet the expectations of people around me. Alors, nous avons monté des pièces classiques, des pièces de Molière, et puis j'ai eu un peu plus de courage et j'ai commencé à monter des pièces de l'absurde. Mais pour dire à quel moment est-ce que j'ai décidé de monter des pièces collaboratives, c'est-à-dire collaboratives dans le sens explicite, je ne sais pas exactement à quel moment j'ai eu cette idée-là. Mais je pourrais peut-être répondre à ta question en disant que, pas la première, mais la deuxième pièce collaborative mettait en vedette l'enseignement du français langue seconde. And I started to think that if we were to transpose to the stage the reality that our students are living, it would be very interesting and a little bit subversive as well to put on the stage dynamics of language teaching. And so we created a show, Écoutez, n'écrivez pas, which was a parody of l'enseignement du français langue seconde. And at that point, I realized that theater is collaborative, and by nature, and by definition, and that as well, if you bring to the stage an experience that students have all lived, that the actors have all lived, let's not call them students, let's call them actors, that the actors have all lived, then maybe you could just do go one step further and create together shows that are reflections of some dimension of the reality we left when we came into the theater. So the collaboration was happening, I think probably before I realized it was happening. Et tout ce que nous avons fait était animé par cet esprit de collaboration, sans que je m'en rende compte au départ. Mais je pense que c'était la parodie de l'enseignement du français langue seconde qui m'a permis, en un premier lieu, de renouer avec le théâtre de l'absurde, parce que la vie peut être absurde, mais aussi de parler avec les étudiants et aux étudiants à propos de leur vécu. Je pense que c'était à partir de là que nous avons vraiment commencé à faire de la collaboration explicite.
We're talking a lot about bilingualism and its effects, its necessity in some cases. I was wondering, because as an educator, you started off in this as a teacher, but there's a certain, I think there's a certain interplay between being a metteur en scène and then being a teacher. Looking at the people who are on stage as both students and actors, because they follow those same streams. How do you think, two-part question that's going to probably get a bit too complex, but how do you think that the process of creating and of acting in two languages, not necessarily languages that they already know in some cases, or that they fully are comfortable with, how do you think that affects them, the people on stage, as actors, as a group of actors? And how do you think that affects them as students? Can you speak to the kind of the interplay that's going on there? It's not a normal theatrical experience.
No, it's absolutely not a normal theatrical experience. To speak in very, very rough and general terms, there are two kinds of theater. There is theater as an aesthetic experience, where you focus on the outcome, you focus on the product, you focus on the spectacle, and you want to reach the highest aesthetic standards possible. Ça, c'est le théâtre proprement dit. But there's also what we can call developmental theater. Theater which is focused not so much on the product, although the product is important, but also focused on the process. On the process of stepping out of your comfort zone, stepping into another zone where it's a safe space, but you're also going to take risks. And in the process of taking risks, you develop not only on the linguistic level, not only on the theatrical level, but you also achieve development on the personal level. And this is what we call developmental theater. And in fact, the project that Amanda is working on right now, based on our production, the process and production of Caen, she is looking at what we are calling points of intersection, point d'intersection, moments in the process when individual actors felt that they had somehow progressed, gained more confidence, more self-awareness, more maturity, peut-être plus de recul, plus de sagesse, what they developed as human beings. So developmental theater, I imagine that there's always a developmental theater happening, but in Tintamarre we try explicitly to look at both the product and the process. And when you ask people who've been in Tintamarre to talk about how they found the experience unique, they will talk about community, they will talk about risk-taking, about support from everyone else in the group, they will talk about gaining confidence. Ils parlent surtout du côté développemental. And then if I can go back to a reference you made to the fact that theater is somewhat like teaching. Absolument. In another venue, I do another aspect of my life. I do workshops on teaching, and where I try to show and explore with others the notion of teaching as a dramatic experience. The teacher is a metteur en scène. The teacher is a producer. The teacher is a technician. The teacher is a script writer. The teacher is a stage manager. And everyone who's taught, I think, would agree to this. Teachers are production managers. Et j'ai aussi une métaphore pour l'enseignement qui est très importante pour moi. Qu'est-ce que c'est qu'un professeur? C'est un acteur qui vise à devenir spectateur le plus vite possible. The teacher is an actor who wants to become a spectator just as quickly as possible. Par contre, what is a student? A student is a spectator who should want to become an actor as soon as possible. And this says a lot to me about the amazing affinity between teaching and acting, or between teaching and being a theatre practitioner. Une autre métaphore, l'enseignement est une danse. Et c'est une danse où il y a deux partenaires, and teacher and student. And after a time, the teacher forgets that she or he is a teacher, and the student forgets that she or he is a student, because the role, in good teaching situations, the role of teacher-student is constantly being switched back and forth. And in a really successful class, in a course, and on the stage, we are all teachers, and we're all students. And those two roles are constantly shifting back and forth. Et pour moi, ça c'est l'enseignement réussi, mais c'est aussi exactement ce qui arrive en scène, lors d'une bonne répétition.
C'est un art.
Tout à fait, tout à fait, oui. C'est un art et que personne ne comprend exactement, mais c'est un art auquel on vise. Comme tu sais, moi je vois partout des métaphores théâtrales pour l'enseignement. Pour moi, tout ce que nous faisons est répétition. Everything is rehearsal. And I think as teachers, we're constantly rehearsing. No class is an end in itself. Aucune discussion n'est un but en soi, parce qu'on est toujours en train de préparer une autre finalité, une finalité qui est toujours dans l'avenir.
On parle du théâtre, de l'enseignement comme des arts, mais il y en a certains qui diraient it's not an art in many capacities, it's a craft. There is technique to it, there's knowledge that comes with it. And so veering slightly away from the philosophy of Tintamarre and into the nitty-gritty parts of it. A lot of the actors to whom I've spoken speak about the Tintamarre process. It's not a formula. It's not it's not a machine that you grind yourself through. But there are certain techniques. There are certain games that are played. There are certain things that are done. I'd like to think fairly consciously within the group to achieve certain personal outcomes and certain group outcomes. And I was wondering if you could speak to that. Perhaps about the development of it, but even Tintamarre in its current state. What do you see as being, when people come in and they've never been to Tintamarre before, what process does somebody go through, and what aids that process so that we eventually get that group dynamic?
You're absolutely right, Bernard. Teaching is both an art and a craft, and we're constantly moving between one and the other. And without the craft of the so-called teachable moment, that moment of extreme excitement when we're moving forward all together, will not happen. There are techniques, and I think perhaps you've hit on, to me, is the most important question, but also the most elusive question of all. I feel that, in a sense, Tintamarre has crept up on me. In that, through many years of practice and developing techniques that I don't think I was particularly aware of. It is, I don't go into a rehearsal. I always go to a rehearsal with objectives. Always. Perhaps that's part of the craft. You can't have a rehearsal without objectives. And you can't have a rehearsal without saying to yourself afterwards, all right, which objectives did we reach and to what extent? although I go into a rehearsal with objectives, I don't know what's going to happen in that rehearsal. And it's the same in teaching. I've given a couple of workshops where I use Oliver Gladwell and his concept of blink. There are blink moments when suddenly you resort to a game or to some technique or other. Perhaps it's a technique of a theatrical type. Perhaps it's a technique of interpersonal relations. But suddenly in those blink moments, you realize that to keep moving forward here and to keep developing and to keep l'épanouissement going, you have this blink moment where you think, aha, I'm going to do this. We're going to play this game or that game. Or we're going to try this blocking or that blocking. We're going to, let's stop right here and do some exercice de virlangue, tongue twisters. Or let's take this line and see how many different emotional registers we can bring to this line. What can I do here to help an actor have better intonation? And so on. We're constantly, in the midst of trying to create the art, we're constantly resorting to little bits of craft which might help us all, or help an actor move forward towards a deeper interpretation of a character, and to help a group of actors move towards a deeper interpretation of a stage dynamic. But it's just, you're constantly moving back between the art and the craft. And I feel that this is what you do in the classroom all the time. And it's really no different from the stage. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't have a list of games. I can't remember some of the games that we play. I don't have a list of techniques. It's so much of those blink moments that I referred to are intuitive. They're sudden, and I guess this is what comes from decades of experience. But this is also why we're creating the website, in an attempt to give courage, pour encourager les autres comédiens, metteurs en scène et professeurs qui aimeraient essayer les techniques de Tintamarre, qui sont passionnés aussi par notre projet.
Mm-hmm. En utilisant ces techniques-là, des techniques peut-être émergentes, instinctives des fois, pour vous, avez-vous remarqué, ou quelles ont été plutôt les difficultés qui sont sorties de ce processus-là, s'il y en a eu, du point de vue linguistique, du point de vue logistique? Est-ce qu'il y a eu des moments où ça a été difficile d'essayer d'élaborer quelque chose et que vous êtes parvenu à surmonter?
Voilà, là j'hésite à te répondre parce que, comme j'ai dit, après chaque répétition, j'essaie d'évaluer le processus. Qu'est-ce que nous avons accompli ce soir? Qu'est-ce que nous n'avons pas accompli? Pourquoi est-ce que je suis content de cette répétition? Pourquoi est-ce que je suis déçu? Et je me rends compte, tu sais, que j'essaie de ne jamais montrer ma déception dans une répétition. S'il y a un problème, on essaie de résoudre le problème, mais on ne peut aller que jusqu'à un certain point. On ne peut pas trop viser un comédien, on ne peut pas trop insister sur un certain moment, sur une certaine scène. Alors, tout ce qu'il y a comme problème, comme défi, comme déception, j'y réfléchis beaucoup après la répétition et avant la prochaine répétition. Mais pendant que nous sommes tous ensemble dans la salle de répétition, tout ce que nous faisons est positif. Il arrive parfois que je pense que je montre ma déception, mais j'essaie de ne pas montrer ma déception. Je dis toujours aux comédiens que j'apprécie beaucoup leur générosité, j'apprécie beaucoup le temps et l'enthousiasme qu'ils ont apporté à la répétition. Alors je ne peux jamais perdre le temps de qui que ce soit. Alors, pour cette raison, les problèmes, j'essaie de les résoudre pendant la nuit, entre les répétitions. Mais, autre chose, deuxième volet, très important, c'est que moi je trouve que très souvent, dans les répétitions, il n'est pas nécessaire même de signaler le problème, parce que si on travaille de façon collaborative, d'autres ont remarqué l'existence d'un problème aussi. And the number of times we've been in a rehearsal, someone's having a problem, I am thinking, how am I going to resolve this problem? It could be blocking, it could be tone of voice, it could be lack of conviction, so many things. I am just having that thought when one of the actors will say, what about trying it this way? What about trying it that way? And so often the problems go away and I have nothing to do with it. My role has been to begin by creating a safe space into which the actors come and support, help, criticize, and congratulate each other. And I don't know if I would even call myself a director. I call myself a facilitator. I'm there with my gray hair to just help people feel that someone has established the boundaries here, but that within those boundaries, people will help each other to solve the problems. This is part of the magic of Tintamarre, and this is part of what is very difficult to put into words, and certainly to explain as a technique. Because the groups of students who come to Tintamarre and are actors as soon as they cross the thresholds are the most generous people I have ever met, and also happen to be very talented. But generosity comes first.
Do you think that kind of process is reflected in the performance? Do you think the audience gets some of that?
Yes, I do. I have no doubt about that. The audience feels the collaboration, the cooperation, the support that's happening on the stage. And when we tour shows, we almost always have a post-show discussion after the performance. And very often, high school or junior high or elementary students in the audience will make a statement which will begin like this: you all seem so happy together. You all seem to be working so well together. They see the teamwork, but more than seeing it, they feel it. And this feeling is transmitted to spectators. And oh, so often, this will be one of the first comments that come from an audience. You're all having so much fun together. Do you ever get angry at each other? Do you ever annoy each other? How do you get along so well? And that teamwork is transmitted to the audience. And I think very often when students in schools see this esprit de corps, they're experiencing not only admiration and fascination, but also, I think, some nostalgia. And there was an Italian in the 20s Antonio Gramsci, who talked about prefigurative institutions. A bit of a big term, but this really applies to theater. When people see a play happening, a play of the collaborative type, of the type we're talking about, you hope that this feeling of community, of teamwork, and it's playful, but it's also very serious because we're asking serious questions about the world. You're hoping that this feeling of community will somehow transmit itself to the audience, and that spectators will go out realizing, hey, you can come together to have fun in more than one language and also poser des questions sérieuses à propos de notre monde. And I always feel that I hope that that actors who've helped to create our plays, have performed our plays, will also go forth after Mount Allison with the memory of Tintamarre, with the memory of creating a community to ask some very serious questions while having fun doing it. That the Tintamarre community will be recreated in their lives, wherever their lives may take them. And this is the same way I feel about teaching. I hope that the classroom experience will be one of community. For example, I teach at the graduate level in an American college in the summers now, and you should see the expressions on people's faces at the beginning of this graduate course when I told them that within a couple of weeks we'll have to choose a team name. And ça les choque, on va choisir un nom d'équipe. Mais tu sais, au bout de 2 semaines, il y a toujours des discussions très intenses à propos du choix de nom, because the students suggest names for our team, and then we choose our team name after 2 weeks. Everyone appreciates being part of a team, being part of a community. And if you can, and we have lots of other techniques as well, but if students take a course where they feel that the classroom experience was more than just a class, that it was a community, then our hope is that when students go on to other studies and then on to life and become citizens in their communities, that they will have been inspired a little bit by the experience of living a team, living a community in their classrooms. And so, again, similarity between what happens in our rehearsals and what happens in courses and in classrooms.
Taking a bit of a different tack against the wind that we've got out here, we were talking about the performance and how it really shines specifically when we go touring, perhaps because it's such a closed or a close-knit space. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about the Tintamarrathon. How did it start? How did this university theater project suddenly decide to go out on the road? And what do we do now? What's the process of the Tintamarrathon?
Again, when did it start? How did it start?
What are your vague memories of it?
Yes, well, I guess the first play we toured was not a collaborative. It was a little play by Arabal called Picnic en Campagne, a play about war. And I remember, I guess I'd been thinking for a long time, there is such interest in the university community for the plays that we do and for the bilingual work that we do, and maybe this should be shared more widely. I thought about it for quite a while, but I was a little bit reluctant because I guess it's a question of confidence, feeling that you really have something that you want to share with the outside world. And when we took out that little play by Arabal, I remember that tour. It was only, I think it was 3 performances in northern New Brunswick, and it was just a wonderful experience. And I experienced the magic of going into a school gymnasium, or going at times even into a classroom or into an audiovisual room, whatever space. The space is not important. You can go into any space and create a theater. Vous transformez cet espace en théâtre pour un petit moment, la durée du spectacle, discussion après, et puis on part. And when we leave, I've thought for years, I always like to look back when we leave a gymnasium or a high school auditorium and think, the space looks exactly the way it did when we came in here, but what magic we've created. And people have shared images and insights and ideas. And it was that first tour that just triggered everything. And then the second play we toured was one called Footing, again not a collaborative. It was about, because I used to be a long distance runner, it was about running, and it really appealed as well to students in schools. I think because it was a subject they could relate to. So experiencing the magic of going into a school and helping people to have fun while also watching a show and asking some serious questions, experiencing that magic, also realizing that we could bring topical subjects to students in schools, and just the very excitement of touring and going from place to place, and having no two shows quite the same dynamic, quite the same magic, no two audiences the same. I realized this is a really valuable experience, and it's just as valuable for the actors who take the shows out on the road as it is for the students and teachers in the schools. I realized that teachers were really encouraged when we took plays into the schools, because leur rôle c'est d'enseigner le français langue seconde, mais très souvent pour les étudiants, même au Nouveau-Brunswick, qu'est-ce que le français? C'est un code de communication dans la salle de classe, et ils n'entendent pas le français à l'extérieur des cours. Ils ne parlent presque jamais de sujets pertinents en français. So I realized we had something huge to offer to people in the schools, but it was a valuable experience for us as well. And then, as I said earlier, Écoutez, n'écrivez pas was the first collaborative, and then I realized to share with people and students the joy of creating our own theater. Creating our own theater with modest means. We always have quite simple sets, really, with modest means and with whatever personal limitations we may happen to have. Creating what I call handmade theater. Not glitzy theater, but theater that we create with limited means, but where we ask very serious questions. It was just such a joy to share this with people in the schools. And now, je suis en train d'organiser notre 22e Tintamarrathon, and the messages that are coming from teachers. Oh yes, we're so looking forward to meeting your actor students again this year. Some of the teachers say that Tintamarre est un événement, un des événements les plus importants de l'année. So we have a place in the hearts of people in the schools and in the culture of the schools as well.
How do you go about planning a tour? I mean, when, you know, we have a Tintamarre production, it usually, if we're lucky, it runs in February because we've had the time to deal with
Voilà.
building it in the first term. What happens between the performance of the play for the university community and the first few performances outside in the Maritimes? How do you plan a tour?
I guess the first thing I do is I get out last year's itinerary and I check the schools that we've gone to last year, but also the days. For example, I know schools where Tuesday morning is the most appropriate time. Other schools that like to have us on Friday afternoon and so on. So I look at last year's itinerary, I prepare the publicity, and it's so much easier now with email. I send out the publicity to all the contact teachers in the schools from last year. And of course, it's very important to have a contact teacher in a school. And if a teacher who is keen leaves a school, then we might lose that school because ce contact est de toute première importance. So I send out all the publicity, and then I wait a day or two to see which responses are coming back. And then I just have a big sheet of paper where I organize it petit à petit. And I will suggest to a school, last year we performed on Wednesday afternoon. Is that still convenient for you? And so I try to follow the model of previous years. And I don't advertise to schools that where we haven't been before, because we only have a certain amount of time and we always have more requests than we can manage to accommodate. But just par la force des choses, each year there's a new school or two. For example, last year we went to a brand new school in Nova Scotia where the teacher contacted us because she had a very favorable report of Tintamarre from a teacher in another school where we've been going for many years. So, and it just worked out that we could add that school last year. And so we went to that school. It was absolutely wonderful afternoon. It was a Friday afternoon, and we're going back to the same school again this year on a Friday afternoon. This year, we're having a new school in Truro, which happens to be 10 minutes from a school where we've been going for a number of years. But I do it more or less on a first-come, first-served basis. And sometimes we lose a school because they didn't reply as quickly. And so it's a little bit following the schema from last year and a little bit trying to fit in just as many schools as possible. And it gets, when I get closer and closer to filling the schedule, it becomes harder and harder to squeeze in 2 schools, sometimes 3 shows a day. But also, c'est une question de géographie. Est-ce qu'on va pouvoir aller de point A à point B entre le matin et l'après-midi? Alors, c'est une question de logistique. And I rather enjoy it. I think I'm going to be a geographer when I grow up, so I quite enjoy planning these. En français, on pourrait dire que c'est un genre de raid qu'on fait à travers les provinces maritimes.
Excellent. Eh bien, on est quasiment aux 45 minutes.
Voilà.
Est-ce qu'il y a quoi que ce soit d'autre que vous vouliez dire? Quelque chose, soit dans vos notes ou auquel vous avez pensé à propos de n'importe quoi? Je vous laisse carte blanche.
Mais tu sais, Bernard, tu as posé de si bonnes questions. Je ne sais pas ce que tu vas faire de tout ça parce que j'ai vraiment... j'ai parlé à bâton rompu. Tu sais, avant l'entrevue, j'avais fait des notes. J'ai mis 3 mots sur mon petit bout de papier ici. Collaboration, contexte et communauté. Et je pense que nous avons parlé pas de ces 3 aspects. C'est collaboratif à partir de 0. Et comme tu sais, déjà cette semaine, on a eu une première séance de brainstorming pour choisir notre thème de l'année prochaine. Collaboration à partir de 0, jusqu'à la fin. Macro-collaboration et micro-collaboration, le tout. Contexte. On ne peut avoir une pièce sans un contexte. Qu'est-ce que nous allons dire? On joue beaucoup, parce que c'est ça le théâtre, mais est-ce qu'on pose aussi des questions importantes? Est-ce que le thème, est-ce que c'est un thème pertinent et est-ce que c'est un thème et une histoire qui vont retenir l'attention de nos spectateurs? The spectator is always the arbiter. The spectator is the reason why we do theater. And do we have an interesting context, a meaningful context, and is it an authentic context? Is the French and the English authentic? Is the script authentic? Are we talking about real problems? Do we have convincingly real people on the stage? Collaboration et contexte, et puis aussi communauté. It's all about community.
Merci beaucoup, Alex.
Merci à toi, Bernard. Merci à toi.